Hello, I'm here with Dacre Stoker, who tonight is at the Banshee Labyrinth to do his talk, Stoker on Stoker, an evening with Dacre Stoker. We are very pleased to have you tonight, so thank you so much for coming.
You're most welcome.
So first of all, I understand your family has a bit of a complex relationship with Dracula, the work. So could you tell us a bit about that and tell us a bit how you fit into that, obviously?
Right. Well, Bram Stoker is my great-grand-uncle. His youngest brother, George, is my great-grandfather. And of course, Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in 1897. I was born a long time after that, so I never had the luxury of meeting him. I didn't even meet his youngest brother, my great-grandfather. But his son, George Stoker's son, came to Canada, and that started the Canadians, the branch of the Stoker family in Canada, just prior to World War II.
Hence the slightly different accent.
Exactly. I got into the whole thing just being interested because I got needled around Halloween time by all my friends. You know, what's going to happen at the Stoker household? Is it you can ask for blood or candy? And after enough of that, I finally asked my dad at about the age of 10 or 12. Just tell me what's going on. And he explained after pulling this book, this mustard-colored book, off of the bookshelf, and it was the first edition of Dracula, signed by Bram to his mother. And somehow it ended up in my dad's possession. And I'm embarrassed to say that's the edition that I actually read, but not at 12 years old. I waited till I was about 18 or 19. And from then on, it was something just in the periphery of my life, because I was very involved in university, in sports, as an athlete, then as a coach. And it wasn't until 2003 that a screenwriter contacted me, found me on the internet, and said, I've got this script. It's never gone anywhere as a movie. I want to turn it into a book, and I need someone in your family to help me do it. Are you interested? Nobody else in the family had written any books before, but I don't know why he tried me, but I said, let me give it a shot. So after about a year or two of doing research, I got back in touch with him and said, I'm ready. I've now got some good inside information from Bram's great-grandsons, because there are actually 2 great-grandsons still alive. Bram was one of 7, so besides my great-grandfather, Bram had other brothers and sisters, but Bram was one of 3 that had children. Bram had a son, that son was married, had a daughter, so the name Stoker died out in that branch, but they are legitimate direct descendants, and they live in England, one near Oxford and one the Isle of Wight. So those cousins I got a hold of and said, can you give me some information? What do you know about our famous relative? And they opened up sort of some boxes and said, come on over, we've got some neat stuff to show you. And it all kind of moved its way into me writing Dracula the Undead, the sequel, with Ian Holt. Yeah.
I understand, yeah, you used some of his original notes and some characters which got deleted from previous drafts of Dracula.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that there was actually, Ian Holt had a script ahead, so how much did the material change and sort of grow into it?
Well, it changed quite a lot. The premise that Ian walked in with was a fairly sympathetic Dracula character that wants to tell his side of the story.
Okay.
And that's a little bit like the 1992 Coppola movie and the Gary Oldman portrayal of Dracula. So that was 92. It did quite well in the box office, won I think 2 Academy Awards. We started this in 2003, and it didn't come out till 2009. So it was, and I think the timing was right to bring back a sequel. Other people have continued the story, but a member of the family hadn't. And for better or worse, this was the Dracula that we chose to portray. And the action really picked up 25 years after Dracula ends with the remaining characters, because some had died, and we introduced some new characters, ones that Bram had actually put in his notes. One of the most important one was Detective Cotford. And then Elizabeth Bathory we chose, sort of much like Bram went into the history books to find Vlad the Impaler. We decided to bring Countess Elizabeth Bathory into the story as a real badass vampire.
And you also, I think, Bram Stoker, in an introduction to some edition, sort of tied it in slightly to Jack the Ripper, which I believe.
Right. In the 1901 Icelandic edition of Dracula, not only has it turned out that it's a different story, an early draft, I believe, that Bram wrote, but the preface was very different than any preface of any Dracula ever published. And the story goes that Richard Dalby, a British researcher in 1989, found this thing, translated it, and it's sort of a page and 3/4 long, and it actually mentions the word, you know, these murders that happen in London have the same amount of repugnancy as the murders of Jack the Ripper, which will come into the story later.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they didn't come into the story later for whatever reason. We decided to introduce that concept of the same amount of terror and the possibility that this Ripper is potentially alive and connected to the vampires.
And the book sort of left the door open for a sequel. I mean, this is quite a while later, and there hasn't really been much news since then.
No.
So,
yes, there has not been the sequel. I've put my energies into Bram Stoker, getting to know him more, and opening up the eyes of the world to what Bram has done, what some of his inspirations are, some of his motivations, some of the secrets that I've uncovered, and that's become my lecture tour, Stoker on Stoker. That then, 2 years ago, became starting a real interesting labor of love, fictionalizing Bram Stoker writing Dracula. That has become Dracula, a prequel to Dracula that has been sold to Transworld Publishing here in the UK, Putnam in the US, and numerous others around the world. In addition to the film rights have been sold to Paramount, and the movie and the book won't be out till next year. The movie maybe a year later. So I don't know when I'll get to the sequel of the sequel, because I'm tied up with the prequel. I feel a little bit like a Star Wars junkie when I say that, because you know they come and go, and but it's something that's been on my mind. Ian is busy with other things, and I'm just not sure when we're going to get around to do it, but I think putting all my energy into the earlier story first.
so you said it started out about the writing of. I mean, obviously, don't want to go into spoilers for something coming out in a year or 2 years.
Right.
But can I ask how you got from?
You can ask. I can only tell what I'm allowed to tell. But
Okay,
go ahead. You
cool.
ask.
Yeah. So how do you get from the creator looking into his creation and then into a story about what happened before the story he chose to
Right.
tell?
So basically, you've got young Bram from birth, and the sequence of events that led up to his life, and what those, how those events changed his life, and things he met along the way that caused him to write Dracula. Now, I start with all those things being real, and then J.D. Barker and I add fiction to it, because it's fairly exciting to me, but it may not be that exciting to everybody else, even though some of the things are pretty gruesome that Bram went through. But if we're going to interject the supernatural into a natural world of Bram Stoker growing up, we've got to take some liberties, and we've got to add some fiction to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I can say is that he does come up against a supernatural evil when he's middle-aged and has to deal with it, and therefore, as a result of that, he writes Dracula as a warning that vampires are real.
That sounds very interesting. That would be a lovely note to end on, but I just one. This is something I missed. I bought Dracula the Undead when it came out, and I did a lot of essays and stuff at school about Dracula and the first adaptations and stuff. So I'm surprised I missed the Lost Journal of Bram Stoker.
Oh yeah, that was something I found in one of the cousins' attics in the Isle of Wight. So during the research for the Undead, I was like, what have you got about Bram? There's some letters and inscriptions and books and so on, and one of them was this sort of, just brown leather journal with undecipherable handwriting. Now, I'd already seen some of Bram's handwriting in his Dracula notes in the Museum of Philadelphia, and they had been published by Elizabeth Miller and Robert 18 Bazang. So I knew it was Bram's handwriting, no question. And we started seeing his name in this journal. And it was quite interesting because it gave me the insight to get into his head. It is not a diary, and diaries would be, today I did this, and this is just thoughts, more commonplace, observations, ideas, practice writing, some poetry. And it's surprising when Elizabeth Miller and I took all this, translated the whole thing, and got it into the English language as we know it, how many of those thoughts made their way into other stories that Bram wrote. So it would be like most writers today, keeping random thoughts somewhere in an organized way, and then going back to them later on and going, well, okay, I'm thinking about this story, and I sort of remembered that thing about that lady with the yellow hair. Oh yeah, this is what he thought. Could have been 5 years ago, because the book actually spanned 11 years with over 300 different entries. So it was a real treasure trove of what was important enough that Bram saw for him to go and write down and keep for use later on.
And then how it sort of stayed in the back of his mind for several years,
Yeah.
and how it appeared at the end.
I found I do similar things myself with a spiral notebook. Just get these thoughts, random things, and jot them down, and they may never go anywhere, but sometimes I get in the right mood and I go back and look and it triggers just one little thought and it just goes.
Yeah, no, I have that as well. Sometimes I'll think of a name or something, and then several months later go through old files and I've thought of the exact same name at a different time and think, oh, that's still there somewhere.
And it helps, because if it was a good enough thought at that time for you to record it, it's probably got some other little piece of your brain ready to sort of go and expand. So get it down, and then at least you know you've got it. It's a keeper for now.
Okay. Is there anything you feel you want to end on?
Well, I will tell you this. On this tour I'm on right now, very sort of Scotland-centric, part of my trip was up in Cruden Bay. And I had known Bram had been there. I didn't know how often he went. I didn't know exactly the impact on him. But it's been very profound on me when a local researcher would take me to the places where Bram went, and in a similar fashion to this lost journal, this guy Mike Shepard would show me in The Mystery of the Sea, The Water's Mouth, and even in Dracula, certain things that Bram described as he would sit in a certain place, as only somebody could do sitting in that place. As I look here, and to the east is this, and the west is this, and the north is this rock shaped like this, and the cave right here. So on this trip, I've actually, 170 years later, I've been standing in places with Stoker eyeballs, looking at things that Bram looked at and described them in his books. And that's been very interesting. And also I found out that he was there at least 13 times that Mike has recorded, by newspaper articles and other observations by people who've recorded them. So this is really quite new. I don't think any biographers to date have known and taken the time like Mike Shepard has to figure out that Bram Stoker was in this one place for over 13 years. Whitby, we know he went once, and that had a big, profound effect on Bram, because he placed chapters 6, 7, and 8 there. But that was 1 3-week holiday. And they really kept very good records in those days. The newspapers knew who was coming into town, visitors, where they stayed. And Cruden Bay, 13. So to me, this has sort of opened up a Pandora's box. So I'll be back to work with Mike and find out more of things about who knew about Bram. I gave a presentation there, and a lady came out of the audience and said, yes, my great-grandmother had this book. And it was a copy of The Mystery of the Sea, signed to a doctor. Turns out that this is the doctor that treated Bram on one of his holidays when he had pneumonia. Wow. So the more I open up, the more I go, the more things, and it's fantastic and very satisfying.
Yeah, retracing the steps, sort of through time almost.
Yeah, yeah. Feeling the things that he felt and trying to understand those. And so as I sort of do these amateur behavioral, sort of profiles of Bram, this helps being here and seeing it and experiencing it and breathing it, feeling it.
Well, hopefully more information comes out and we'll hear some of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, appreciate your time.